Carbon or organic compounds are made of carbon. And of all the elements, carbon is one of the most important elements in all living things. And there's a few reasons for this. First, carbon's able to form covalent bonds with other carbon atoms. And remember, covalent bonds are the strongest bonds, and so it can form very strong structural components of living things. Carbon can bond to many other types of elements, so that gives it a wide variety of different molecules and substances that it can end up making. And so it has the ability to form millions of different structures. When we're talking about carbon compounds or organic compounds, we have monomers, and monomer is a small molecule. It's like a building block. A polymer, also called a macromolecule, is a large molecule. That's what macro means. It means large. So a polymer is a large molecule, and it's made of many monomers, many smaller molecules put together. It's kind of like thinking of a monomer as a single Lego, and a polymer would be what you can construct with smaller little pieces or those individual Legos. There are 4 types of carbon compounds: carbohydrates, lipids or fats, nucleic acids, and proteins. So these are all organic compounds. So what makes something organic versus inorganic? The primary difference between organic compounds and inorganic compounds is that organic compounds always contain carbon. Most inorganic compounds do not contain carbon. And almost all organic compounds have some amount of carbon-hydrogen bonds. So carbon is really what makes it organic. Also, organic compounds are extracted from living things, while inorganic compounds are usually either man-made in a laboratory or they can be found due to natural processes. Another way you can think about it is organic compounds are biological and inorganic are mineral. So, one of the carbon compounds are carbohydrates. Carbohydrates will always have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in a 1:2:1 ratio. So it's always going to have that specific ratio of carbons, hydrogen, and oxygen. And the main function of carbon is to be a main source of energy for living things. Monosaccharides would be the monomers. Monosaccharides are simple sugars. Mono means one, saccharide means sugar. So examples of monosaccharides are glucose, galactose, and fructose. Poly means many. Polysaccharides would be the polymers, the large molecules that are the carbohydrates, made of lots of smaller pieces or the smaller monomers. So these are complex sugars. Glycogen is this complex sugar found in animals like us. Plant starch is found in plants. Cellulose is another one, and that is also usually found in plants. Lipids, a second carbon or organic compound. These also have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So they have the same elements as carbohydrates. The difference is in a lipid, they don't have to be in any sort of ratio. Categories of lipids: fats, oils, and waxes. Functions of lipids: long-term storage of energy. This is different than carbohydrates because carbohydrates is that initial usable source of energy. Lipids are fats and store energy long-term. So basically, if you have carbohydrates that your body can't use for energy, it may start storing those as lipids, long-term energy. Lipids also protect and insulate. They build cellular structures, in our next unit, when we talk about cells, we'll learn about how the cell membrane is composed of lipids and waterproofing substances. For example, our skin has lipid components in it that help to make it waterproof. And chemical messengers like steroids, those are different sorts of lipids. All lipids are made of the monomers glycerol and fatty acids. So those would be like the Lego pieces to build the large lipids. Some lipids are called saturated fats. They're saturated because there are single bonds between the carbons. So saturated refers to every carbon having a maximum number of hydrogens attached to it because of the single bonds. They're saturated with hydrogen. And usually they're solid at room temperature. They also usually come from animals. Unsaturated fats have at least one double bond. They might have more than that, but at least one double bond. And so they become unsaturated because that double bond causes fewer hydrogens to be attached. So if you look at this here, we have a double bond right here, and that means that we don't have hydrogens attached to those sides. Unsaturated bonds or unsaturated fats are usually liquid at room temperature, and they almost always come from a plant source. Third type of carbon compound are nucleic acids. These have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Main function of nucleic acids are to store and transmit genetic information. The monomers that build nucleic acids are called nucleotides, and nucleotides have smaller components. A nucleotide will always have a 5-carbon sugar, it will always have a nitrogen base, and it will always have a phosphate. And then to build the large nucleic acids, many monomers, many nucleotides are fit together. The two main nucleic acids are deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA, and ribonucleic acid, RNA. The difference or main difference between these two nucleic acids has to do with the sugar, and they're actually named for their sugar. So DNA sugar is deoxyribose, and RNA sugar is ribose. We'll talk much more about these later in the semester. And most of you know that DNA is our genetic information. RNA is going to be a helper of DNA. And then the fourth carbon compound are proteins. Proteins are made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Proteins have so many different functions in the body. Some of them are to be a building material for certain structures, like our bones and our muscles are primarily protein. They have immune function. So some proteins are part of your immune system to help protect and keep you protected from pathogens or things that can make us ill. Proteins regulate chemical reactions, and we'll actually be talking about those in just a little bit in this unit. These proteins that can regulate chemical reactions are called enzymes. And proteins can transport substances in and out of cells. The monomers that build proteins are called amino acids. There are 20 different kinds of amino acids, and those 20 different amino acids can be put together in lots of different arrangements to make thousands upon thousands of different proteins. There are different levels of protein structure. The primary structure refers to those amino acids that are put together to build the protein. Secondary structure has to do with those amino acids that were put together. They're going to either twist or fold into a specific shape depending on how those amino acids were put together. Tertiary structure is when the entire amino acid chain folds up even more condensed. And then quaternary structure is when the amino acid chain combines with other chains to form a large polypeptide. Any change in the original amino acid sequence, which is the primary structure, can change how the amino acids interact, which alters the second, third, and fourth structure. So the entire structure of a protein is dependent upon what amino acids we put together and in what sequence. If that changes, that can change the secondary structure, that can change the tertiary structure, and that can change the quaternary structure. And then finally, this chart is just showing a quick overview of the 4 different carbon compounds. So we have in the first row carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins, the 4 different compounds. Next, in the next row, we have what they are made of or they consist of. So carbohydrates, sugars and starches, lipids, fats and oils, nucleic acids are made of nucleotides, proteins made of amino acids. And then finally, the last row is showing the different elements that actually make up each of these compounds.